zajmuje się geografią społeczną, bada takie życie codzienne grup, jakieś relacji w nich, a to, co wydaje mi się najbardziej ciekawe w jej wystąpieniu, to idea dzielenia się, czyli sharing, i jak to wpływa po prostu na jakość społeczną. A Helen dojdzie też w swoim wystąpieniu aż do takiego pojęcia jak sharing city. No, brzmi to naprawdę ciekawie. Zapraszam.
Yeah, thank you. What does the word infrastructure bring to mind? When politicians usually talk about investing in public infrastructure, it's code for economic competitiveness. It describes the physical construction of airports, roads, bridges, maintenance of factories. It typically entails a very fixed utility grid, the kind of fixed high investment utilities that lock individuals into hyper-privatized, isolated, fragmented single-family housing and the debt-ridden lifestyle that goes along with that. In contrast, I want to highlight today the soft infrastructure of daily life. By this I mean social contact, compassion, care, trust, and the capacity to share, nicely interweaving with Dick's earlier presentation. These binding institutions of sharing and caring and compassion are just as essential for connecting people and localities as bridges and highways. And they also require investment. Just as large sums of money are invested to maintain hard infrastructure, soft infrastructures have to be understood and valued, though not necessarily in financial terms, before they can develop and harness for public good. Some scholars use the term social architecture for this, but I prefer to use the term soft infrastructure specifically to tie in with the idea of the soft interpersonal skills like empathy, sociability, and conviviality, also creativity and learning. Digital space might be involved in building communities, but I want to stress here the importance of embodied human interaction and co-presence, the shared meals, the shared space, the social time and collective endeavour that Dick was talking about. What do I practically mean by the term soft infrastructure of daily life, and how do we know when it's effectively constructed? How do we know how to make it effective to support conviviality and sharing? Well, I draw particular inspiration, personally and professionally, from the autonomous free town of Christiania in Copenhagen. Christiania has a fascinating history, 40 years of struggle with the Danish state. It's located in prime real estate in the heart of Copenhagen, in the heart of the very desirable part of the city. It has spent 40 years flouting the conventional rules of market competitiveness. It's been a thorn in the side of the Danish state. 2 years ago, I went to live, just for a short time, in the free town of Christiania. I went there as a single parent with my daughter. So I went there as an academic, but also very much as a parent, to contemplate the common dilemmas of work-life reconciliation. How do we reconcile the fragmented, often socially isolated busyness of our daily lives with concerns to conduct our life more mindfully, more carefully, more compassionately? I found inspiration there in the myriad soft infrastructures of daily life. Sorry, I'm just going to have to jump slides out of order here. The soft infrastructures of solidarity and sharing that opened up in the mutual spaces of alternative economies. So Christiania came into existence in 1971 when a group from this alternative Danish newspaper, missing some slides here, staged a symbolic takeover of a centrally located military area. One motivation for pulling down the fence in this abandoned barrack building was to create green space for local children to play. This was not regulated space, but a junkyard that allowed children to run free with their imagination and to run creativity Sorry, the slides have been taken out of this for some reason. This radical approach inspired the construction of self-built homes in a car-free landscape, uninterrupted by fences to identify personal territory. Indeed, what defines this social experiment is the absence of a property market, private property market. Over 4 decades, the community has invented sweat equity and money collected from the his invested effort and personal endeavour, sweat equity, and money from a collective common purse into the maintenance of the grounds, the modernisation of a sewage system. When the community first squatted in 1971, there was the joke that this was a 40-acre site and there were no toilets. They created a bathhouse early on, they created compost toilets, they created their own, effectively, off-grid grid. Christiania is affectionately known as the place where nothing goes to waste. They invented reuse, reduce, recycle long before it became the mantra of many environmental organisations. It's also affectionately known as Loser's Paradise. It has an alternative welfare system that supports some of those people who would otherwise not have a home, a perch, in a city as expensive as Copenhagen. Perhaps surprisingly, the overall impression of Christiania is one of tranquility and a joyous place to raise children. Many visitors go there and say, but this is so beautiful, why is it not in the mainstream? And arguably there are lessons to be learned from Christiania and from other intentional communities that have also conducted research in for this cultivation of soft infrastructures in the mainstream. Around 900 people live in Christiania today, and although it's now legal, just last year, and it's under pressures, enormous pressures to normalise, the community continues to operate through consensus governance without any leaders. But autonomy has always come at a price, and it's also contingent on external struggles. And it's very, very important not to romanticise this or trivialise the challenges involved with this sort of social experiment. And the point of this is to say that it's not enough to harness individual willpower to resist the hegemonic model of competitive consumer-led growth. It takes co-present, collective action to build and reimagine collaborative community. And I think Christiania is a very good example of this. But it's not the only example. Today, we're witnessing a renaissance, a burgeoning of interest in sharing. And the online magazine Shareable is a great example. According to the mission statement of the Shareable magazine, in a shareable world, things like car sharing, clothing swaps, childcare co-ops, potlucks and co-housing make life more fun, green and affordable. And I'd ask you just to think about the average residential street and think about all the stuff that exists in that street. Ladders, leisure equipment, cooking utensils, garden tools, children's toys, bicycles, canoes. And think about the storage space of all that stuff. And think about the maintenance of all that stuff. But most of that stuff is individually owned and purchased and stored in each little box on that residential street. The reality of that excess stuff results not only from privatised consumption, but the lack of a soft infrastructure, the lack of social interaction, the lack of trust, familiarity, and crucially, the mechanisms by which neighbours who might know each other on nodding terms, but they need to come together and organise ways to share ownership and share use. This doesn't exist in the mainstream residential street. This highlights the way that new technology connects individual to information and individual and information to physical things in efficient ways. But it also reinforces the significance of a real geography of proximity and conviviality. And a recent survey by Shareable magazine showed that the most popular items for sharing were those that involved co-presence, so living space, workspace, food preparation, meals, household appliances and clothing. So this burgeoning interest in sharing practices has led a number of scholars to think about a kind of resistance to this global march of progress and actually a sense that we are returning to some old-fashioned market behaviours. Some market behaviour reinvented on a scale that could be thought of as the kind where a financial lending institution will lend to a catchment area governed by what should be no greater than that you can see if you crawl to the top of the local church spire. So the church spire principle, a very local geography of trust and knowing. And a word of caution here that I wouldn't say that this renaissance in sharing and convivial practices based on proximity and localism, it's not the same as saying that people are running to the hills, mistrustful of multinational corporations, mistrustful of all things on a greater scale. And arguably the benefits and ethic of care of this very local alternative economy can go hand in hand and can coexist with the global ethical trade relations. Looking for inspiration for ways to rebuild our cities and neighbourhoods, we can learn from intentional communities like Christiania, we can learn from co-housing models, we can also learn from peace camps and festivals and what might be called temporary autonomous zones. For example, the Burning Man Festival has taken place every August since 1986 in a temporary city of its own creation. So every year, a community, a town of some 60,000 people is constructed in the space of a matter of weeks for a 2-week period. It emerges in the desert, in the Nevada desert, called Black Rock City, named after Nevada's Black Rock Desert. And this year, this temporary city, as I say, accommodated a population of 60,000. Obviously, creating a temporary city on such a scale requires a whole new approach to providing the shelter and services that people need. And the key to success at Burning Man is participation. The temporary population of Black Rock abide by 10 principles. They're too small to read there, so I will tell you what the 10 principles are. Radical inclusion, gifting, decommodification, radical self-reliance, radical self-expression, communal effort, civic responsibility, leaving no trace, participation, and immediacy. So the key to this participatory approach is that Burning Man fosters a culture whereby most of the city is built without any direct oversight. It's not built by architects or engineers, it's built by the people who populate the city for those weeks in August. It's built with self-built DIY constructions, often by artist groups and organisations that want to demonstrate their eco-constructions. Volunteers help to organise basic infrastructure such as roads, sanitation and safety. And participants turn up and construct temporary shelters such as shops and stages in the spaces in between. It is an organic urban community. It is, if any of you are familiar with maybe informal squatter settlements in much of the global south, much what we might talk about as sites and services approach. The site is provided and those people who are going to inhabit the space create the space and engineer it. So you might ask me at this point, why am I drawing upon examples like Burning Man and Christiania? These are examples which maybe are at the margins of what is possible in the mainstream. Well, I would argue that many towns and cities around the world recognise that a business-as-usual approach is completely unsustainable, and they have to adopt sharing-friendly policies in the future. And to do this, they need to be more experimental and they need to be more imaginative. And they can look to these experimental and temporary intentional community spaces for that innovation. And it's not only utopian dreamers who claim there must be a better way for society to live less wastefully and more mindfully. Much of my research is involved with fledgling groups of people who come together who do not have land, they don't have the buildings, they don't have the physical structure of a town or a neighbourhood, but they are a community, they're a forming community. And I'm working with numbers of groups that are working on the conviviality and sharing, and they're doing so through face-to-face regular encounters of building community before they will ever get to physically realise the co-housing or intentional community of their imagination. And I would argue that conventional urban structure cultivates neither the interaction nor the trust that makes possible these imaginations, and so these grassroots organisers are doing this. So in conclusion, I put to this audience, all of you as potential change makers, that the future requires creative engagement in building co-present associations, new expressions of togetherness and collective endeavour. And it's not sufficient to imagine a neat engineering solution to our social and environmental crisis. We cannot all run to the hills. We have to invest time, space and effort collectively in the soft infrastructures of daily life to build communities for people, by people, before we can reimagine and engineer the physical structures for those communities to inhabit. Thank you.
Dziękujemy, Helen. Thank you. And teraz, and it's time for a little question. So it's really amazing what you're saying about this sharing. And I was wondering if we imagine that everybody are doing this, and how we could imagine our civilization, how it will look. Maybe we will more like nomads, or new value we will create. Or what do you think?
Well, I think it's a little dangerous to think sometimes about going back as if we are nostalgically looking to a pre-modern time, but often the sort of collective we're talking about of 30 households looks very much like a clan or a tribe, and that sort of convivial, inter-household, inter-family, extended family cooperation, mutuality and trust has always been in existence, and it's really only in recent decades that we've undermined that, and we've seen it wither away under threat from individualized consumption and the pressure for people to work longer hours and often in competition with each other. So I think, although we are maybe trying to recultivate what I think has always been there, we do need to look at that in terms of scale as well. Scales maybe of gathering that we have no longer see.
Thank you. Dziękujemy, Helen, za to wspaniałe wystąpienie.